Chapter 165, Amora, 2. GHHH. After an unknown period of time, feeling light pierce through the gap of my eyelid stimulating my pupils, I slowly opened my eyes. As I opened my eyes, what met my sight was a blue sky devoid of any clouds. A rich scent of nature invaded my nostrils, causing my groggy mind to slowly clear up. As I lay down on the ground staring at the sky, the first thing that caught my sight was the sight of 3 bright yellow balls floating in the sky. Are those suns? As I stared at the 3 yellow balls in the sky, after a couple of seconds I had to look away due to the stinging sensation in my eyes. They were indeed 3 suns. I was in Amora, and the 3 suns were confirmation of it. Turning my head left and right, I found myself laying down on an expansive field of grass. In the distance, I spotted large boulders protruding from the ground, and though sparse, trees also appeared in the distance. So far, apart from the 3 suns in the sky, everything looked exactly like Earth. As I tried to lift my hand, I soon noticed that I had to exert a lot more force than I was used to. It felt as though there was a massive weight hanging on my hand. Frowning for a second, I instantly realized what was going on. Right, the gravity here is 3 times stronger than that of Earth. With this planet being a lot bigger than Earth, both in terms of size and mass, the gravity of this place was also thicker. Fortunately, the past few months I had been training in the gravity room provided by the Academy, expecting something like this. Thanks to that, I wasn't overwhelmed by the gravity. You up? As I sat up, I suddenly heard Kevin's voice from my right side. Turning my head in his direction, I saw him leisurely sitting on top of a small rock cleaning the sheath of his blade with a white cloth. Squinting my eyes to adjust my eyes to the bright light coming from the suns, I curiously asked, "How long was I out?" With his eyes fixed on his blade, Kevin responded, "Not much, around 10 minutes since I came here." Massaging my forehead, I nodded my head and slowly stood up. Although I had trained under this gravity before, I still needed time to properly adjust to this planet's gravitational force. All right, that's not too bad. If I was passed out for a day, then things would have gotten complicated. Fortunately, it wasn't that long. Fwa! Tapping onto my bracelet twice, I took out a black rectangular box and threw it at Kevin. "Here, go set up a dimensional space." Taking the box, Kevin looked at me in confusion as he looked around the empty grassland. Dimensional space? Here?
Yeah.
Let's rest first. I mean, look at the state you are in. There was no way I was going to travel with Kevin in the state he was in. Especially not with the glaring black circles beneath his eyes. Considering how dangerous this place was, for him to move around in his current state was like asking to get himself killed. All right. After a bit of thought, Kevin nodded his head. Ren's suggestion did indeed make sense. He was indeed tired. After fighting every day with the students from other academies, Kevin wasn't in his optimal condition. Although his opponents weren't anything special, because he wanted to benefit from the sparring, he had set himself multiple handicaps, which resulted in his current situation. Playing with the black box in his hand for a couple of seconds, Kevin looked at me and asked, "What's the radius on this thing?" 10 meters, anything other than that and I'd probably go bankrupt. I wasn't lying about that. A whopping 5 million U, that's how much that thing cost me. In order to buy that thing, I had to slip my hands into the mercenary group's budget. If not for the fact that I swore to Small Snake that I was going to pay the money back in a week's time, I would have never been able to buy that thing. Still, it was a good investment in my opinion. This way I could at least rest without worrying too much about my safety. All right, I'll get on it now. Putting his sword down, Kevin scanned the surroundings and started setting up the dimensional space around us. Good. Seeing Kevin move around the area we were in to set up a dimensional space, taking out a small black bead from my bracelet, I mumbled. While you do that, I'll set up a tent. And thus for the next 10 minutes or so, whilst I set up the tent, Kevin set up a dimensional space. Although there didn't seem to be any beast or demon around the area we were in, it was never a bad idea to be cautious. With the dimensional space around us, we didn't have to worry about any demons spotting us. Exactly 10 minutes after he started setting up the dimensional space, Kevin walked back in my direction. All right, I'm done. As he walked back, pressing onto a button, a large transparent dome appeared above our heads covering the area we were in. Fwawa. Nice. Staring at the dome that was forming above our heads, pointing towards the seat next to me, I urged Kevin to sit down. Good, take a seat. All right. Nodding his head, Kevin took a seat and leaned back. Silence prevailed in the surroundings as neither one of us spoke. Taking out an energy bar from my pocket, I opened the wrapper and took a bite out of it as I looked into the distance. This place sure looked peaceful for a world conquered by the demons. However, I knew that this was merely a facade. This place was nothing but peaceful. Danger lurked everywhere and one wrong move could cost our lives. Knowing this, we had to be especially cautious when moving around. We couldn't be careless. As my thoughts paused there, frowning slightly, I looked at Kevin and broke the silence. Let's rest up for a couple of hours. After that, we will be moving. Where are we going? Good conjurer. Taken aback, Kevin looked at me and asked. Good conjurer? Nodding my head, I slowly said.
Yeah.
The last remaining orc city. Good conjurer. That was the name of the last and final orc stronghold in Amora. A massive city that had over 1 million orcs guarding it. Although this planet was currently conquered by the demons, they had only conquered around 80% of it. The last 20% of the land was still under the orcs' control. Although the land that they currently controlled was mostly infertile, by occasionally plundering the demons, the orcs were able to somewhat keep a foothold on this planet. Moreover, because the demons were currently focusing on conquering Earth, they didn't have enough manpower to fully take control of this place. But still, although it wasn't fully conquered, it was only a matter of time before all of the orcs on this planet died. With their limited food supply and lack of reinforcements, they were currently on the verge of being eliminated. This was also part of the reason why this place was so dangerous. With how desperate the orcs were, conflicts between the orcs and the demons were a common sight on this land. With both sides constantly fighting whenever they had a chance. Knowing this, when moving around, Kevin and I had to be extra careful to not get swept into the conflicts, as we could very well die considering the fact that we were only in rank. Something that was equivalent to cannon fodder in this world. And although I knew all of this, going to Good Kodra was the first and most crucial step to my plan. Everything would begin from there. I see. Frowning, Kevin remained silent for a couple of seconds. With the system helping him, Kevin had a general idea of the circumstances of this place. What shocked him, however, was how Ren was able to know all of this information, considering the fact that not even the people back on Earth knew of this place's existence. This made Ren's image in his mind become even more obscure. Still, Kevin didn't plan on asking him how he knew this information. Everyone had their own secrets, Kevin included. One of the reasons why Kevin liked Ren was because he never questioned his decision or things that seemed to be out of place. Even if he did something crazy in front of him, Ren would most probably not ask him how he did it. He was someone that respected boundaries, and Kevin liked that. And since Kevin knew this, he also decided to not probe too much. As he said before, everyone had their secrets, and unless they willingly told you their secret, it was better to not probe too much. This was called respect. As his thoughts paused there, Kevin opened up the map of Amora through the system interface and had a good look at it. A couple of minutes after opening the map, turning his head towards Rin, he asked. But why are we going to the good Kodra first? Actually, that aside, you still haven't explained to me why we are here. Right, I still didn't tell you. Hearing Kevin's question, I nodded my head. It was about time I explained to him my plans. Staring at him directly in the eyes, I slowly said. We are going to look for the cure for the Mindbreaker curse. What? Opening his eyes wide, whilst still seated, Kevin looked at me in disbelief. Their Mindbreaker curse? The one curse that is infamous for being incurable? How could Kevin not be shocked when he heard that they were looking for a cure for something that was famous for not having a cure? Noticing Kevin's reaction, I nodded my head.
Yeah.
You heard correctly, the Mindbreaker curse. How? I thought that it was incurable. Staring at Kevin, I shook my head. Just because there isn't a cure on Earth doesn't mean that there isn't one somewhere else. The world was just, there was no curse that there was no cure of, and there was no disease that couldn't be cured. It's just that the cure for it wasn't discovered yet. Hoo. Taking a deep breath to calm himself down, Kevin tried to regain his composure. Honestly, although shocking, Kevin knew that this trip wasn't going to be a simple vacation, and the fact that they had come here to find the cure for something that wasn't supposed to have a cure made a lot more sense than just coming here to sightsee. Although shocked, he was able to quickly calm himself down. Solemnly looking at me, Kevin asked. If going to Good Kodra is the first step of the plan, what comes after that, and what are you hoping to achieve? Hearing Kevin's question, placing my hand on my chin, I thought for a moment. Well, if we want to put it in simple terms, MHH. Pausing for a second to find the right words to say, after a bit of thought I said. We're going to shake this place to its core. Chapter 166, Amora, 3. The ground shook, and a loud metallic sound reverberated across a green field filled with rocks and trees. Shortly after the metallic sound was heard, a deep yet powerful voice shook the surroundings. Rangum Lunk Tar Gul. Holding onto a large metallic axe dyed in what seemed to be black blood, was a tall, white, and muscular humanoid figure that had a large scar covering half of his face. His heavy green eyes that were buried beneath his eye sockets looked up towards the sky where a black humanoid creature with black horns and large bat-like wings stood. Similarly looking back at his opponent, the black humanoid creature's blood-red eyes menacingly stared at the orc beneath him. Neither one of them spoke, however, heavy tension prevailed over the surrounding. KHHRRR, KHHRRR. With each breath, the orc took, turbid air escaped from his mouth making him look terrifying. Behind him, over 1,000 or so similar humanoid creatures stood with their backs straight wearing a thick metal armor that covered most of their facial features apart from their eyes. Every single one of them glared towards the sky where a similar number of demons stood in the air. Karam. 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 Stabbing their weapons onto the ground shook as the orcs repeatedly chanted their war cry. With every cry, they would rhythmically thump their weapons on the ground resulting in an oppressive feeling to shroud the surroundings. Looking at the orcs beneath him, with a twisted sadistic smile on his face, the leading demon opened his mouth and chuckled. Kakik, Laring Mavel Tum. Kalum Tatunum Ruveltum Voil. Pointing his thumb towards his neck, the demon sadistically smiled towards the orc legion before him. Thereafter, he slashed his thumb past his neck as he excitedly shouted. Canter. Staring at the demon from below, unbothered by his provocation, the pale white orc raised his axe in the air and pointed it towards the demons in the air. Shortly after, his powerful voice once again shook the surroundings as he shouted. Gone damn boo! As soon as the white orc's voice traveled across the ear of each member, the orcs behind him raised their voices as they stabbed their weapons on the ground even more fiercely. Karam. 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 Not long after, simultaneously lifting their weapons in the air, arching their thick frames back, the orcs threw their weapons in the air. With unprecedented speed, the weapons that ranged from axes, hammers, broadswords to all kinds of other heavy weapons, hurtled towards the demons in the sky, splitting the air apart. Screams echoed in the air, as the demons used their wings to protect themselves from the sudden attacks from the orcs. Kai! As the weapons collided with the wings of the demons, some of the demons were able to repel the weapons whilst others found their bodies completely crushed by the gigantic weapons headed in their direction. Black blood spilt from the sky. Karam! With their hands in the air, as the weapons got repelled by the demons, a dark green hue shrouded the weapons that were still in the air. Suddenly the weapons that were falling on the ground sped back towards the orcs standing on the ground, perfectly landing in the palm of their hands. Karam! Retrieving the weapons back, the orcs raised the weapons in the air as they chanted their war cry once again. Kai! Enraged by the orcs' sudden attack, with their nails sharply protruding from their fingers, the demons dove down towards where the orcs were. As they dove down on the ground, with each flap of their wings, their speed multiplied several folds, leaving behind after images. Not long after the demons attacked, blood started spilling from both sides as desperate roars and cries echoed across the expansive land. Holy fuck! Not so far from the confrontation, standing behind a massive boulder, putting my finger on my lips, I quietly whispered to Kevin, who had almost cursed out loud. Don't scream and try to hide your presence as much as possible. Covering his mouth, Kevin nodded his head.
Yeah.
Good. Turning my attention back towards the fight in the distance, a solemn look appeared on my face. As Kevin and I were making our way towards Good Kodra, we suddenly heard the loud war cry coming from the orcs. The logical thing for Kevin and I to do once we heard the noise was to obviously move as far away as possible. However, that was not what we did. That was because I suddenly had an idea. Turning my head towards Kevin, I softly whispered. Can you decipher what they are saying? To me, what they said made no sense. The language that they were currently using was a language known as Latvia, and was the main language that orcs used. As I didn't learn it, I understood nothing. Fortunately, I had a walking translator next to me. Kevin and his system. Frowning, with his eyes fixed towards the fight in the distance, Kevin responded. Yes, I can. All right, tell me what you managed to understand. Nodding his head, Kevin started speaking. To summarize what I've gathered from their conversation, the orc at the front of the other orcs is called Silik and he is a legion commander. According to what he said, there are a total of 3,500 orcs in his command. Turning his attention towards the leader of the demons that stood in the air, Kevin continued. On the other hand, the leader for the demon side seems to be a count-ranked demon, which is equivalent to an A-rank hero. Although he didn't state the number of demons he has with him, it should be about the same. Pausing for a second to gather his thoughts, after a couple of seconds Kevin continued. Regarding why they are fighting, I don't know. By the time we got here, the conflict was already escalating and so I wasn't able to get much. Hearing Kevin's evaluation and translation, I nodded my head. That's fine. I didn't need to necessarily know why they were fighting. That wasn't my goal here. Turning his head in my direction, Kevin asked. So what do we do now? With my eyes fixed on the battle ahead, I responded. We wait. Wait?
Yeah.
The time for us to move is not ripe yet. Not yet? Then what's your plan? What could they possibly gain from this fight? And what was the plan that Ren was talking about? Kevin wanted to know. Here, come closer. Seeing Kevin unsatisfied with my vague answer, sighing and urging for him to come closer, I explained to him my plan. The plan was rather simple. Once everyone was distracted fighting, sneak in and camouflage into an orc by wearing their equipment and pretend to be one of them. That was it. There was no grand plan behind it or anything like that. Although there were other ways to enter Good Kodra, directly entering from the entrance was probably the easiest and safest way to do it, well, at least compared to the other options. Moreover, since orcs weren't the brightest creatures, by hiding in the masses, Kevin and I could probably get away with this. Though dangerous, it was the most appropriate plan at the moment. As I slowly explained my plan to Kevin, not long after, he looked at me in disbelief as he said, "You're crazy. If we do it that way, won't we be discovered? Moreover, what if one side loses? If the demons won and all of the orcs died, what was the point of sneaking in? Moreover, what if they got discovered by one of the orcs on the way back? Wouldn't that just spell instant death? I mean, since they were surrounded they had no other option but to die. A single mistake and death awaited them. This plan was extremely risky." "Don't worry." Pointing in the distance where the fight was happening, I looked at Kevin and said, "Take a look at the leaders of both sides, and tell me who looks calmer?" "What do you mean?" Though doubtful, peeking from the side of the boulder, Kevin observed the leader of both sides. Currently, both sides were at a standstill with the orcs and demons fighting against each other. Casualties started to pile up from both sides. However, although there were casualties on both sides, in terms of numbers it seemed to be even as there were just about the same amount of orc corpses as demon corpses laying on the ground. Taking his eyes off of the main battlefield, Kevin looked towards the respective leaders of both sides. And he soon noticed that neither one of them was moving. Seeing their lack of action despite the fact that their subordinates were dying, caused Kevin to frown for a second, but he soon understood why they weren't moving. With both sides being a lot stronger than their soldiers, if they moved then the aftershocks of their battle would affect their own troops. It would even be more devastating. Simply put, the two of them couldn't fight just yet. Recalling Ren's words, staring towards the faces of the two leaders, Kevin soon noticed a peculiar thing. And that was that compared to the orc leader, the count-ranked demon had a frown on his face as he spectated the battle from below. Moreover, with each passing minute the battle dragged, the deeper the frown on his face became. This definitely meant something. Suddenly, a certain idea came into his mind as he exclaimed in a small voice, "Ah!" Observing Kevin's reaction from the side, with a faint smile on my face, I looked at him and asked, "Now why would the orc leader be calmer than the count-ranked demon?" Taking his eyes off of the battle and looking back at me, Kevin slowly said, "Reinforcements." Pausing for a second, Kevin repeated in a low voice, "Reinforcements for the orcs are coming." Seeing that Kevin understood, the smile on my face deepened. Bingo! That's exactly it. With reinforcements coming from the orcs' side, it was only natural that the battle would shift toward the orcs' favor soon. Therefore, after observing this fact, I knew that the plan was feasible. As Kevin too understood this point, he proceeded to nod his head. "All right, if you put it that way it makes sense. That's right." Just as I was about to speak, cutting me off mid-sentence was a large rumbling sound coming from where the battlefield was as the ground beneath us shook fiercely. Abruptly turning my head towards the battlefield, I soon realized why. It seems like the count-ranked demon can't hold himself back anymore. I guess that's our cue. Solemnly looking at me, Kevin nodded his head and said, "All right. Let's hold on." Just as I was about to sneak into the battlefield, recalling something and taking out a couple of potions from my pocket, I threw them at Kevin. "Take this, you're going to need them. Make sure that once you're in the orc armor you chug all the potions I gave you down." Grabbing onto the potions that I threw at him, a look of confusion appeared on Kevin's face. "What are the dash?" Just as he was about to ask about the potions, I had already disappeared from my spot, leaving him standing alone behind the rock we were peeking from. "Damn it, at least tell me what I need to use them for." Cursing out loud, Kevin glared at where I used to be and proceeded to head towards the battle as well. How careless. Hearing Kevin's shout from the distance, I couldn't help but shake my head. Fortunately, the loud sound from the battles had drowned out his shouting, else they would have caught him already. I felt a bit sorry for leaving without explaining what the potions did, but it's just that I really wanted to join in on the fun. Chapter 167, Amora, 4. As I quietly moved around the perimeter of the battlefield, I made sure to hide my presence as much as possible. By hiding behind rocks and trees, I slowly crept my way towards the battlefield. Explosions rang everywhere and pained and enraged screams echoed around the battlefield. Both sides continuously fought against each other, with the orcs swinging their massive weapons down and the demons diving down from the sky, piercing through the gap of the orcs' bulky armor. Black and green blood sprayed everywhere as both sides relentlessly tried to kill one another. Turning my head to the side, I stared towards the distance where the battle between the two leaders was happening. Standing with his back straight, Silig, the Legion commander, swung his axe downwards. As his axe touched the ground, the air split apart and a humongous red light quickly approached the Count-ranked demon in the air. Raising his hand and in a slapping motion, the Count-ranked demon's hand made contact with the energy beam. As soon as the Count-ranked demon's hand touched the red beam, everything turned deathly quiet. Everything stood at a standstill as be it orcs or demons all looked towards the distance. Soon a bright red light enveloped the surroundings and a massive explosion rang out. A massive shockwave swept the surroundings as both orcs and demons in the vicinity were flung away. Not long after, as the light died down and the aftershocks of the explosion settled down, I soon saw the Count-ranked demon diving towards Silig with unprecedented speed. His blood-red eyes now were tinged in black as his left hand hung by a few threads. However, if one looked closely, one could see the fiber of his muscles slowly regenerating, reattaching his arm in place. Stoically staring at the demon heading in his direction, Silig raised his axe in the air and screamed out loud. Gra-ah! Soon the demon and the orc once again came into collision and another massive shockwave swept the place. Shh! *T. Observing the fight from the distance, I couldn't but silently curse to myself. How long will it take me to reach their level? Staring at the two leaders fighting in the distance, caused my blood to boil. Such power. Such overwhelming might that caused the surroundings to shake with every single one of their moves. I too wanted to become that strong too. Strong enough to not worry about carefully thinking about every single one of my actions. I knew I was being greedy. Yet, I couldn't stop myself from wanting that sort of power. And although I knew that the speed of my strength increases could be described as nothing short of a miracle, that didn't stop me from longing to be that powerful. Still, I knew that some things couldn't be rushed. Staring at the two leaders fighting in the distance, I knew that it was only a matter of time before I surpassed them. As I was deep into my own thoughts, suddenly out of nowhere, an enormous frame crashed against the trees that were next to me, tearing everything apart, creating a cloud of dirt. Startled, I immediately crouched down and looked towards the direction of where the crash happened. Unfortunately, because of the dirt shrouding the area, I wasn't able to get a proper look at what it was. Turning my head to look behind me to make sure no one else was coming, I slowly approached the area where the crash happened. KHRR. As the dust settled down, an orc appeared laying down on the area next to me. With each breath he took, white air escaped from his mouth. Soon our eyes met. Luton Garin Moven Human. As his eyes and my eyes interlocked, after a short pause, the orc lifted his head and shouted out loud. Noticing this, placing my hand on the sheath of my sword, I quickly channeled the mana inside of my body and apologetically said, "Sorry, I don't speak Orcan language or whatever it's called." Dash. The first movement of the Keiki style, quick flash. Thereafter, before the orc could defend himself, a bright light illuminated the surroundings, and a streak of light pierced straight through the small gap of the armor the orc was wearing. Green blood sprayed everywhere. Hoo! Exhaling, I removed my sword from the orc's body as its body lifelessly slumped on the ground. Staring at the orc on the ground, I forcefully tried to calm my beating heart as I wiped the green blood that had splattered on my face. If I said I wasn't nervous right now, that would have been a lie. Although I wasn't sure about my opponent's true strength, I was at least able to infer that he was at least around my level. Fortunately, he was injured, or else the situation might have turned troublesome. Regardless, although nervous, I was able to retain my composure, which proved to me that I was growing. Had this happened to me 5 months back, I would have blanked out and lost some valuable time. It was fine to be nervous, everyone feels nervous. However, if that nervousness affected your judgment, that's when you knew you had a problem, and right now, I no longer blanked out whenever I was nervous. Alright, enough time wasting. We were finally going to good Kodrer. Walking towards the now dead orc, I immediately stripped him of all of his armor. Fucking hell, this crap weighs a crap ton. Throwing the armor to the side, I couldn't help but curse to myself as I felt the weight of the armor. It felt as though it was a car. Sigh. Beggars can't be choosers. Sighing inwardly, looking at the corpse of the orc beside me. Taking out some oil from my dimensional space, I threw it at the orc and snapped my fingers that were coated in flame scions. Not long after, a raging fire appeared in the area I was in. As this was a common sight on the battlefield, it attracted no attention. Crouching down and carrying the armor away from the fire, I found a somewhat secluded area and put on the armor. To say it was easy would have been a lie. Let's ignore the fact that the armor was too big for me, just the weight alone made me feel sick. It was already hard enough for me to adjust to 3 times the gravity. Now that I was wearing something that weighted like a truck on me, it felt as though my legs were made out of lead. I could barely stand straight. Fortunately, I had a solution to this. Taking out 3 potions from my dimensional space, opening the lid with my thumb, I tried to down them in one go. Here goes no dash. However, just as I was about to drink the potion, the ground shook even more fiercely than before, causing me to lose my footing slightly. Fortunately, I was able to regain my footing. If not, I might have lost the potions. Staring towards the distance, I slowly muttered. Reinforcements are here. Seeing that I didn't have much time left, quickly chugging down the 3 potions in my hand, I soon found my body expanding rapidly. In a matter of seconds, I was soon able to fill the armor completely. Moreover, the armor was no longer as heavy as it was before. The reason why I was able to do this was because of the 3 potions that I had just consumed. Gigantification potion, potion that rapidly expands body. Effects last for 1 day. Strength magnification potion, potions that increase the strength of the user by a factor of 2. Effects last 1 day, and agility decreases as a result of consumption. Voice-changing potion, potion that enables the user to change voice as he or she pleases. I didn't really need to explain why I needed the first 2 potions, however, the last potion, although it sounded useless, was an extra precaution I took in order to better disguise myself as an orc, as the orcs' voices were loud and powerful. Although I couldn't speak the language, in case they were chanting their war cry, I wouldn't be exposed. Now I guess it's time for me to go. Taking out the red book for a brief moment, I read through some of the pages. Not long after, closing the book, I slowly made my way out of the forest I was in. As I walked, with every step I took, the ground shook. Unbothered by this, I soon made my way out of the thin forest, and what I saw next shook me to the core. Karam. 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 On the expansive grassland before me, waves of orcs could be seen marching towards the distance, chanting their war cry and thumping their weapons on the ground. Wherever they went, the ground shook. At the helm of the orcs, standing on top of a large boulder was Silig's figure, who was menacingly staring towards the sky where the Count-rank demon stood. Next to him, another orc stood. He had a similar presence to Silig, however, differently from him, his skin was red and his body was bulkier. He looked terrifying. Staring at the Count-ranked demon in the air, the red orc shouted, "Qualum Torin Plusen Kar." Staring at the red orc below him, still smiling, the Count-ranked demon responded, "Veluum Tennessee Lem." As the Count-ranked demon and the orc leaders were conversing, I slowly walked towards the legion of orcs in the distance. As I walked, I made sure to not hide my presence as I kept my back straight and fearlessly walked past the grassland towards where the other orcs were. The reason I was doing this was because I wasn't the only orc that got separated from their legion when fighting against the demons. Therefore, in order to not look suspicious, I had to approach them head-on, and fortunately, not long after, I was soon standing next to hundreds of other orcs, staring towards the distance where the two orc leaders were. Tyralem Valken to Mad Good Kodrer. Silently staring at the leaders in the distance, closing my eyes slightly, I spoke inside of my mind. "Hey, Angelica, are you there?" Calling for Angelica inside of my mind, after a short pause, her voice entered my mind. Yes. Once again opening my eyes and staring at the leaders of both sides, I asked Angelica inside of my mind. "Angelica, can you understand what they're saying?" After another brief pause, Angelica responded, "Yes." "Can you translate for me?" "Yes, but don't talk too much with me, human. I feel a strong presence near here. If I'm slightly careless, I might get exposed. So I'll explain to you once you leave." Finally understanding why Angelica was taking so long to respond, I nodded my head in understanding as I looked at the Count-ranked demon in the distance. "All right, I'll wait once he leaves." Although Angelica was currently hidden, there was no guarantee that she wouldn't get caught. Though the chances were extremely low, that didn't mean the chances were not zero. Moreover, with the demon ahead being a Count-ranked demon, it was never wrong to be extra cautious. Thankfully, it didn't take long for the Count-ranked demon to leave. Kikek, Kalatom. Jiviet. 10 minutes after Angelica stopped speaking to me, with a loud chuckle the Count-ranked demon flapped his wing in the air and disappeared into the distance as a sonic boom. Next to him, the remaining demons too disappeared in the distance with large smiles on their faces. Although I wasn't able to make out what had happened, I knew that the demons had succeeded in whatever they were planning. That was because not long after the demons left, an enraged roar swept the surroundings and vegetation. "Gun dem Buell." The source of the shout was Silig, whose chest was rising up and down fiercely. Turning his attention towards the red orc next to him and the legion behind him, Silig shouted, "Karam! Quick, human, thump your weapon on the ground." As soon as Sigel's voice faded and hearing Angelica's warning, using the axe I got from the previous orc, I rhythmically thumped it on the ground and shouted like the other orcs. "Karam! Karam! Karam!" Turning around, Sigil headed towards the distance and the troops followed along. His face was incomparably dark. Chapter 168, Good Kodrer 1. As dark clouds enveloped the sky and blocked the sunlight from shining down upon the land, on a mountain range, rumbling sounds echoed across the surroundings. Marching through the large rocky terrain were over 1,000 orcs wearing thick metallic armor that weighed over a couple of tons. With each step they took, the ground beneath them shook. Randim Gal. Walking at the front of the army of orcs were 2 orcs that stood out from the rest. A white orc and a red orc. Presently, both of their faces were incomparably dark as their chests heaved up and down unevenly. The legion commander, Silig, had an especially terrifying expression as the large scar on his face became even more glaring. As we walked, a boundless bloodlust exuded from his body. The bloodlust was so powerful that the orcs standing next to him were trembling uncontrollably. Almost as if they were staring at death itself. Watching the scene from further back, with my head straight, I softly said in a deep voice, "How long do we have left?" Walking next to me, wearing a large metallic armor that covered most of his body, was Kevin, who coldly said, 10 more kilometers. Turning my head to the side, and noticing Kevin's attitude, I realized that he was still holding a grudge against me for the potions thing. Rolling my eyes inside of the large metal mask, I apologized. "All right, I'm sorry about the potions thing, you don't need to be so mad about it. I do understand that I was at fault here, but it's not like something would have happened." Let's exclude his perks as the protagonist, I also had the book with me. With it, I knew Kevin was going to be fine. I wasn't dumb enough to make him do something that would end up killing him. Not mad? I was almost caught because you didn't tell me what they did. No, you weren't, stop exaggerating. He only startled a nearby orc, nothing much happened. Since the orc was too busy fighting a demon, there was no follow-up. Turning his attention towards me, Kevin frowned inside of his mask and said, "And how do you know that?" From what Kevin remembered, Rin left on the opposite side of him, he shouldn't have seen him. Without skipping a beat, I responded, "Since I got lucky and an orc died next to me, I was able to quickly change and thus saw you on the way." Squinting his eyes, Kevin proceeded to nod his head. "I see. Nope, I was actually quite far from him, but he didn't need to know that. That aside, I finally found out why the orcs and the demons were fighting. After the count-ranked demon left, Angelica finally told me what had happened. To summarize it. In short, the demons ambushed the orcs. Normally this wouldn't have been that much of a surprising event considering the fact the orcs and demons fought all of the time, however, this time, things weren't the same as usual. In fact, a big problem happened. And the problem was that the food supply the orcs were carrying was directly targeted by the demons and as a result were destroyed. This was a massive blow to the orcs. With how scarce food was, any loss dealt towards their food supply meant that they were dealt a devastating blow. Especially since food was what kept their soldiers alive till now. The less food the orcs had, the lower the chances of them surviving were. Kevin also understood this, and so as we marched with the other orcs, we discussed what happened. Although Kevin somewhat had gotten the gist of what had happened since he could understand their language, only after I relayed to him what Angelica told me that he fully understood what was going on. He was a bit surprised about how I was able to know this information since I couldn't speak the language before, but fortunately, he didn't pry too much. In the end, as he found out what had happened, he couldn't help but sigh and say, "What a pity." Glancing at Kevin for a brief moment, I softly said in a low voice, "What is?" The fact that orcs can't use dimensional storages, else this situation would have never happened. Pausing for a second, I scratched the back of my head and nodded my head. I guess you're right. What Kevin said wasn't wrong. Orcs couldn't use dimensional storages like humans could, and that was because of one specific reason. Orcs couldn't use mana. More specifically, because orcs couldn't use mana, they weren't able to use dimensional storages as they required mana to activate them. Had they been able to use dimensional storage, protecting the food supplies would have been a breeze as Silic alone could have done the job. Unfortunately, this was not the case as orcs didn't use mana but instead used something called aura. A completely different energy system compared to mana and was only unique to orcs like demonic energy for demons. The reason orcs used aura instead of mana had to do with how they evolved and how they mainly focused on brute strength and their bodies. Unlike mana, which enabled users to channel elements, aura was a force that was hidden within the bodies of the orcs and allowed them to stimulate every single muscle and fiber of their bodies. In doing so, it helped them grow stronger by regrowing their muscle fibers to be stronger and more durable. The end result was their massive bodies that contained boundless raw power hidden within. I didn't need to elaborate on how strong they were, as I had seen Silig's power firsthand. Terrifying. Therefore, because of how they were biologically designed, orcs couldn't use mana. This also explained why the orcs wore crude and heavy armor. It was simply because artifacts were useless to them as they couldn't use mana. Going back to Silig, the reason why he was especially furious was quite obvious. Since he was the leader of the expedition, all responsibilities were going to fall on him for the failure. Suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts, were the sounds of footsteps halting as every soldier stopped moving. Standing on top of a rock, overlooking the orcs below him, Silig's powerful voice resounded across the area. Lura Lon Sawiek. Komi Tun Larion Von Dash. Listening to Silig's voice echoing across the surroundings, frowning, I called for Angelica inside of my mind. Hey, Angelica, is there a way for you to make me understand? After a brief moment, Angelica's voice entered my head as she said. Yes, I didn't use this before because my brethren was there, but now that I no longer feel his presence, I can share a bit of my power. Seeing that Angelica could help me understand, I grew excited. All right, perfect. Honestly, I found the fact that I couldn't understand a thing quite troublesome. Fortunately, I had Angelica with me who knew how to speak the language. Actually, Angelica, how many languages can you speak? I was genuinely curious, since she knew Latvian, which was the orcs' main language. She definitely knew other languages. All of them. Taken aback by her response, I couldn't help but ask once again to make sure I didn't hear incorrectly. All of them? Yes, we demons are born with the ability to know every language out there. Listening to this fact, I was slightly taken aback. Interesting. I never knew this. Especially since I was the creator of the novel. I guess there were still some technical things I didn't know as the author of the novel. Interesting indeed. Focus your mind. Hearing Angelica's voice in my mind, snapping me out of my thoughts, I closed my eyes and concentrated as Angelica told me. Though I was surprised with what Angelica told me, my mind was more preoccupied with other things like wanting to understand what Silig was saying. All right, I'm about to share with you my skill, so try to not lose focus. Nodding my head, I solemnly said. All right. Good. Phew. As soon as Angelica's voice faded from my mind, I suddenly felt a stabbing sensation hit my brain, resulting in my face winching in pain. KHH. A small groan escaped from my lips, but because it was faint no one heard it. Moreover, I had a mask covering my face which helped quite a bit. After a couple of seconds, feeling the pain in my brain disappear, opening my eyes I looked towards Silgus in the distance. Hopefully, I could now understand. Fiercely staring at the sea of orcs beneath him, Silgus shouted as his powerful voice echoed across the surroundings. The flames of war are upon us, KHRRR. By igniting the first sparks, the inevitable clash for the sovereignty of this planet has been pushed forward. Pausing for a second as he stared at the orcs beneath him, extending his hand forward and clenching it into a fist, Silgus shouted. And I swear upon my name, Silgus, 3rd Legion Commander of Good Kodrer, that I will personally end them in the war that they so seek, KHRR. Only upon the smell of those vermin's blood blanketing this world will I finally be able to rest in peace. Karam. 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 Hearing Silgus's speech, a lot of the orcs standing felt their blood boil as they chanted their war cry as they thumbed their weapons onto the ground. Satisfied with the reaction, with his face becoming incomparably serious, Silgus shouted. So, now that we are about to enter Good Kodrer, I want to know, who will stand by my side and who will leave me? Instantly the surroundings became quiet. Listening to the speech thanks to Angelica's skill, I instantly realized what was going on. Silig, the orc leader, was trying to unite the troops by making them take his side so that when we arrived at Good Khodr, he would face a lighter punishment due to his failure. If he had substantial backing, his death or punishment would have an adverse effect on the orcs overall. And so by taking full command of this legion, Silik was trying his best to make himself more important in the eyes of the higher-ups. He wanted to exert dominance over everyone here, before going back to Good Khodr. Moreover, judging from the fluctuations in the air, it seems as though he was using a skill that forcefully exposed people that were planning on betraying him. Fortunately, Kevin and I were not affected by this as we didn't use aura, couldn't say this for the rest of the orcs. And I was right. After a couple of seconds, seeing that no one had responded yet, Silgus shouted out loud once again as the fluctuations in the air intensified. "Say it now." Suddenly, an orc stepped out of the line and shouted, "I would like to leave." As soon as his words came out, silence prevailed in the surroundings as everyone stared at the orc that stepped out. "Oh." Jumping off of the small cliff, walking towards the orc that had just shouted, Silgus asked, "Why are you leaving me?" Trembling all over, the orc responded, I just feel like there isn't much to do. We were ambushed by the demons and yet we weren't able to even defend the food supply which we desperately needed to death." Cutting the orc off mid-sentence, Silgus's deep voice once again resounded across the area. "I don't want excuses." Looking at Silik directly in the eyes, the orc pleaded as he said, "I fought with my life on the line. I almost died multiple times during the fight. I've served you for over 30 years. Please let me go. I've served you faithfully for so long. I don't want to do this anymore." Staring at the orc before him for a couple of seconds, Silik nodded his head. "I understand, don't worry." Patting the orc by his shoulder, Silik smiled. However, the smile soon disappeared and Silik grabbed the orc by his neck and lifted him in the air as a pained scream resounded across the area. "Kaik!" Staring at the orc in his hands, Silik apathetically clenched it, and the loud sound of bones breaking resounded across the surroundings. "Anybody else?" Flinging the lifeless body of the orc to the side, Silik looked towards the orcs before him. After seeing that no one was daring enough to leave, Silik smiled and said, "Good, let's go. Karam. Karam. Karam." Subsequently, as he turned around, the orcs all once again chanted their war cry as they followed along. This time, everyone stood with their backs straight without daring to be negligent. It was evident that his display of power had won them over. Not long after, turning right of the mountain path, my footsteps halted for a moment as I stared at the enormous city in the distance. After a while, as I regained from my stupor, I couldn't help but mutter, "We're here, we're finally at Good Khodr. The place where everything would begin." Chapter 169, Good Khodr, 2. Good Khodr was located 3,000 meters above sea level, on top of a large desolate mountain on the southern hemisphere of Amora. After the demons invaded Amora, the orcs had no other choice but to migrate to the south of Amora where the land was drier and the soil was more infertile. The orcs weren't a united race as they would always tend to fight against one another due to their personalities. However, with their race on the verge of extinction, they had no other choice but to unite. As a result of this, after searching for a while, the orcs managed to find the perfect spot to set up a city and created Good Khodr, the last remaining orc city in Amora. An impenetrable fortress that hid between a cluster of large mountains. Marching with the other orcs, lifting his head up and staring into the distance, Kevin's voice softened a little bit as he said, "So that's Good Khodr?"
Yeah.
From the way he was speaking it was evident that he was overwhelmed by the sight before him. However, I couldn't blame him as I too was overwhelmed by what I saw. On a different mountain than the one we were currently marching on, another enormous mountain appeared in the distance. Its peak was majestic, and the mountain's topography seemed steep and perilous. From a distance, the mountain appeared to have 3 sides that stretched upward vertically, forming a semicircular natural barrier that stretched all the way to the sky. An ocean of clouds drifted above the mountain ridges, making the place look even more majestic and mysterious. Reaching 1/5 of the height of the mountain ridges, enclosing the natural semicircular mountain barrier, was an enormous artificial wall that blocked anything from passing through. By the side of the gate stood 2 enormous statues depicting 2 orcs looking down towards the ground beneath them, holding onto 2 large axes that interlocked with one another. The statues looked extremely intimidating, creating an oppressive and menacing feeling. In the middle of the wall stood a large wooden gate connected to a long and wide flat bridge that linked 2 mountains together. The one Good Kodrer was on and the one we were currently marching on to get there. As we marched across the stone bridge, looking below the bridge, I couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva as I muttered, "How deep is that?" Utter darkness. What was below the bridge was utter darkness that I could see no end of. If I dropped a rock down the bridge, I'd estimate that I still wouldn't be able to hear the sound of the rock reaching the bottom. A couple of minutes after dropping it, it looked bottomless. Hoo! As we neared the gates, taking a deep breath, I tried to calm my heart down. At the moment my heart was beating faster, and that was due to the 2 statues at the front of the gate. Those 2 statues created a natural sense of fear towards anyone that looked at them for too long. It felt as though the real orc was standing and looking down on me. And when I mean orc, I didn't mean a regular orc, but one that was at a league of his own. Open the gates. Arriving before the large gates, walking out was Silig's figure. Glancing left and right and raising his large axe in the air, he shouted, "I, Silig, 3rd Legion commander of Good Kodrer, is waiting to report. Open the gates and let us in." As he spoke, his powerful voice echoed across the mountain range. Not long after Silig's voice faded, the loud sound of chains falling resounded across the mountain range as the enormous doors slowly opened up, revealing the insides of the city. As the gate reached the top, staring at the vast city before me, I couldn't help but mutter in a low voice, "So this is the true Good Kodrer, the last orc stronghold in Amora." As I looked at the city from behind the gates, I noticed that the city itself looked somewhat crude, as the infrastructures weren't created with the finest craftsmanship. With its black wooden rooftops, faded marble walls, and what seemed to be the bones of fallen comrades and demons, Good Kodrer had a frightening atmosphere. The atmosphere was especially stifling, as bones could be seen everywhere around the city, either out as decoration or as materials itself for the houses. "Hey, Ren, look over there." As I was observing the buildings around us, feeling a slight bump next to me, and hearing Kevin's voice, I turned my head around and noticed Kevin staring towards the distance. "What?" "Check out that building." Looking in the direction of where Kevin was looking at, I soon spotted an enormous infrastructure standing in the middle of the city. As I was too busy admiring the area around me, I only noticed the enormous building now. 7 lean, circular towers made out of black stone surrounded the building that Kevin was pointing at. The infrastructure was twice as tall as the towers and was the tallest building that I could see, overlooking the whole city. Similarly made out of black stone, the tall infrastructure resembled a pyramid as its peak reached all the way towards the clouds in the sky. However, contrary to a regular pyramid, its infrastructure was circular rather than squared. By the side of the circular pyramid-like structure, enormous blood-red flags fluttered in the air, adding further grandeur to the infrastructure. "Move along!" Entering the city, Silig once again shouted towards his army. Next to him, 2 more orcs appeared, leading him towards the distance, more specifically the tall building in the distance. As we marched forwards, standing next to me, Kevin frowned. Thinking of something, looking at me, he asked, "So how do we get out of this situation?" Now that they were in the city, how were they going to get out of the army? This was especially so considering the fact that they were basically stuck in between hundreds of orcs. Hearing Kevin's question, I didn't answer immediately as I hesitated. I soon took out my red book and opened it. Well, I did in fact have a plan, but it would probably piss someone off. Not hearing my response, repeating again, Kevin said. Hey, how are we supposed to separate ourselves from the other orcs? Still looking at the red book, I vaguely said. That, we just do it. Seeing how vague I was being and looking at me incredulously, Kevin exclaimed. Don't tell me that you still haven't thought about it. Shaking my head and closing the book, I immediately responded. No, I do have a plan. And? Well, you're probably not gonna like it. Pausing for a second as he squinted his eyes beneath his mask, Kevin had an ominous premonition as he carefully asked. How am I not going to Elha? Sorry. Smiling beneath my mask, putting both of my hands on Kevin's metal armor, I pushed him. As I pushed him, I made sure to apologize to him. You. Who dares? Crashing against a nearby orc, carrying the momentum with him, Kevin crashed against multiple other orcs. Without looking at what was happening, turning around, with a couple of rocks on my finger, I flicked them towards a couple of more orcs standing before me. Who dares? As the rocks hit the two orcs I aimed it on their helmet, turning around the orcs shouted out loud as they glared at their surroundings. Shortly after, the two orcs that I hit looked at each other. Pointing towards each other, they shouted. Was it you? You disgusting bastard. So it was you? You want to have a go? I'll fight you. Within a minute, both sides raised their weapons and slashed towards one another, and a small shockwave appeared as a result of their clash. How dare you? Pushed back by the collision of the two orcs, another orc shouted out loud as he raised his axe and slashed down. I'll kill you. Soon a massive brawl ensued as more and more orcs joined in on the fight, creating massive mayhem. Fortunately, by the time the fight got serious I had already left, else I might have found myself in a pickle.
Oof.
If I had to be honest, this strategy wasn't something I had come up with on the spot. I remember seeing this in a movie, so I just tried to imitate it. Create chaos amongst the orcs and use the opportunity to slip out whilst everyone is distracted. Since orcs weren't the brightest creatures and were easily provoked, this strategy proved to be rather effective. Had they been even a little bit smarter, this plan would have never worked. Plus, I knew everything was going to be fine. Staring at the book in my hands which no one else could see, I leisurely walked away from the orc army. Fortunately, I had the book with me. With it, I could pretty much see if my plan would have failed or not. Of course, even though I saw that the plan I was planning on using worked, it didn't mean that the future depicted in the book was correct. Had I missed my shot towards the two orcs, everything wouldn't have gone as the book had depicted. Therefore, even if the book showed me that everything was going to be fine, it didn't mean that it was going to guarantee success. There was always a chance of failure. Had I messed up, none of what the book showed me would have happened. Well, since everything is fine now, I shouldn't dwell too deeply into it. Putting the book away and turning around, I soon saw Kevin sneaking out from the army of orcs. Soon his eyes interlocked with mine. Well, someone doesn't look too pleased. Staring at him for a couple of seconds, I lightly waved at him as I sneaked my way into the depths of the city. As I moved, recalling Kevin's angry face, a smile appeared on my face and I softly mumbled to myself. Sometimes I can't help but marvel at how trashy I can be. Though not often, it happens, and when it does, well, couldn't say I was the most pleasant person. Melissa and Small Snake probably knew best.